Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Archaeologists in Quarantine. Today, we're joined by special guest, Dr. Gino Caspari. Did I say that right?
Caspari.
Caspari.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. What is the weather like right now? Because in England, it's 35 degrees.
Blazing hot. No, it's I hope my laptop actually makes it through this live session because it tends to overheat, and we'll see. If I'm gone in a second, then you know what happened.
It's so warm today. So I think it'd be great if you could just give a short introduction into yourself and why you're into archaeology. What was the first memory that you have that got you into the discipline?
That's a very good question. I mean, kind of got to start early. I mean, I was always interested in kind of field sciences, but whether that be archaeology or biology, marine biology in particular. As a child, I was just fascinating with, researching stuff outside, and I kind of carried on. And the thing is, in Switzerland, we have these sort of very strict ideas of what a proper job is, and so that's either an engineer studying business, becoming a lawyer, or a doctor maybe, but it's certainly not archaeology. And so for a while, when you kind of in your teens and you're really questioning where you're going, things can change quite a lot, but ended up being archaeology in the end, more by chance than anything else. It's just I've done a number of things, and it kind of all led towards this skill set that is really nicely applied within the field of archaeology.
I'm curious, in Switzerland, how is the commercial sector? Do you have like a well-established commercial archaeological sector, or is it?
It's mostly in state hands. So Switzerland is kind of like kind of divided into different cantons, and most cantons have their state archaeology, and they do take care of most of the archaeology in the country. Meaning if they're construction projects, they have their maps where they know, okay, there's a potential archaeological sites, and then if they start digging there to build a house or something, or build a big road, then they'll send people in who look at the soil, and if shards or bones come up, then they usually stop it and conduct an excavation. But it's all state funded. There's not really as much as be in Germany or in the UK, for example, a real commercial sector. It exists for things like, for example, geophysical survey methods and things like that.
Talking of geophysics, I remember you saying that you were a GIS specialist.
Well, I mean, it's definitely something I have worked with quite a bit. And as you know, like traditionally, archaeology in the German-speaking area kind of comes from art history, especially the classical archaeology branches. And so we're very focused on objects and kind of analyzing stylistics and typologies. And it's only, I mean, a few decades ago already, but there's this spatial turn where people started looking at the environment and kind of an enlarged context, if you want, of these objects that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And they're obviously geographical information systems come in very handy. And especially if you're like me, you're focusing on field archaeology, then you have to have a mean of recording things within a spatial system, right?
That's true. I don't think people realize just how much we need to know the exact location of what we're looking at. And, sometimes even the finds itself, we're going to geolocate its exact positioning before we even lift it.
Right. So, I mean, for my excavation in Russia, together with my Russian colleagues, we actually take a point for every shard that we discover. So there are no mass materials on our site, but every shard, every bone is located with a point on the total through the total station. And so that really allows us to, get the most out of our data.
Wow, I can't imagine doing that for every single piece.
I mean, it's quite the work, but it's it's also, of course, a lot of the material that we dig up is kind of jumbled up and mixed material. So it's not exactly, as archaeologists say, in situ, right? So it's not in its original position, and therefore it doesn't really contain that much information for us. But if you should by chance find out that, so retrospectively that something is really important to you, then you can actually backtrack and see exactly, basically down to the centimeter, where you found a particular bone or particular shard. And that is very helpful, especially, we're never just working for ourselves for publications and things, but we're working for future generations of archaeologists, and that makes it necessary that we really document finds as detailed as possible. So ideally, someone who's never been on the site can sort of understand where things were found and develop new hypotheses, new knowledge from it.
Definitely. And anybody watching, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in either Instagram or on YouTube. So, Gino, you mentioned earlier Russia. Before we get into Russia, what other countries have you worked in?
I've, been hopping around quite a bit. I started working in Italy, you sort of first school excavations, if you want, where you're like really learning how to do things. I've done quite a bit of work in Switzerland, obviously, because it's the closest and it's easy to work on sites here. Then I've moved on to southern France, where we worked in a Celtic cave sanctuary, and I've done a bit of work in Syria before the war, which was very, very interesting. Unfortunately, obviously, the site's completely closed down and absolutely destroyed now. So we had like one of the last chances to really properly document some of these sites. And then I sort of gradually moved eastwards, spent quite a bit of time in China, where I first learned the language that wasn't really related to archaeology in the first place. But and obviously, once you have this tool, because archaeology is always kind of being in a place and working with local people, then obviously knowing the language makes this a lot easier. And so that is what led me to pursue a PhD on landscape archaeology in northwestern China. And that's kind of how I really got into the whole Eurasian steppe archaeology thing, where I've done a lot of remote sensing, basically working with satellite imagery, working with GIS, and then working with these late prehistoric steppe cultures, like the Scythians, all these horseback riders that you often see on my Instagram feed.
Oh, I think that's probably what drew me to your page, the Scythians, and yeah, just the riders. A few hellos, a few shout outs. We have Imikran. It's a hi from Russian colleagues. We miss you in Tuva. Yeah.
Hi guys, I miss you too.
We also have Gala Piridenko. Hello, or Privyet. Archaeolists, hey. And from the Curious Archaeologists, they've asked, what's your most interesting dig?
My most interesting dig is pretty clearly the big project I've been working on with the Russian Academy of Sciences, with my Russian colleagues, Timur Sadikov and Yegor Blokhin, for the past 3 years now. We started in Tuva in southern Siberia in 2017, and we looked at one of these very early Scythian tombs out there. It's a really large royal tomb that we've been working on ever since, and it's located in a swamp. It has amazing wood preservation and is really one of the few sites in that area that we know of that dates to this Bronze Age, Iron Age transition. And that makes it very, very interesting. And so little by little, we've been trying to uncover the secrets that this site yields. But it's been pretty unforgiving so far. It has been harsh and giving us a hard time. So it doesn't really want to give its secrets away so far.
Wow. And do we have any photos that I can show? That you know?
Yeah, actually, most of the pictures that you have on the presentation are actually from the site. Not all of them from the early Iron Age, but most of them are from that particular site.
Okay, so for the viewers, we're going to give you a little treat and you're going to see some of the work that Gino has been involved with. Let me open that up for everybody and hit present. There we go.
There you go, yeah. If you go to, like, I guess the first picture?
First one, there we go.
Yeah. This here is, that's in the periphery of this large early Iron Age burial mound. And so we were lucky because kind of multiple period sites on the steppes are relatively rare. But our site has been used over the course of more than 2,500 years. So we really have this kind of cross-section through different steppe cultures. And what you see here is a multiple burial of a number of individuals that date roughly to like the 3rd, 4th century AD. We have absolutely amazing preservation. If you've ever dealt with skeletons, this stuff basically looks like it's been in the soil for at most 100 years, but it's really 1,700 years old. And if you look around, you can see pottery. We have a lot of iron finds here. And what's very interesting is that all of these individuals are actually buried in individual wood coffins. It's kind of hard to spot here, but if you know how to read soil, right? You see these small lines, for example, on the top.
I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's like up there, like basically where the feet are. There are remains of wood. And in some cases, we have also the coffin nails, and that's where it comes in super handy to have individual points for each artifact that are very precise, because this way we can actually reconstruct, for example, a coffin. We know that some of them, you know, when we have like 2 skeletons side by side, one has coffin nails and the other one doesn't. We can actually see that these were individual coffins, whereas you wouldn't be able to tell just from the wood remains. So sometimes the wood is completely gone. And then having these very detailed data helps a lot in kind of deciphering the archaeological context.
Next one.
Yeah, this is a kind of ritual circle, probably dating much later to like the 6th to 8th century Turkic times, when, you know, we do have the first historical sources on the steppe, so that makes it a little bit easier to understand what is going on, because when we're dealing with prehistoric archaeology, oftentimes we're just left wondering what happened here. So for a lot of these skeletons that we've been digging up in the southern periphery, and we found so far something like 80 plus skeletons just in this one southern area that we've been excavating. About 30% or so are decapitated or have pretty nasty chop marks and cut marks on the bones. So we have plenty of skeleton skeletal trauma, which is very interesting. That's why we very closely work with physical anthropologists to decipher, what actually happened there. And often these nomadic horseback warrior nomads, they are kind of described as sort of belligerent, and violence played a big role in their lives. And we really see that in the archaeological record. So we have skeletons that have arrowheads embedded in the spine or in the chest area. We find, as I said, a lot of chop marks, and things from basically the machete-like swords. And if you analyze the distribution of these chop marks, you can also clearly see that these stem from relatively messy battlefields where often, several people were fighting against one person. We have a lot of hits to the head, to the upper parts of the body, and then we have a lot of cuts on the lower extremities. And that kind of shows you that you had people on horseback fighting against people who were on their feet. And one very interesting thing that also came up was that we had these very small slices on the inner part of the neck vertebrae. That, of course, is interesting, because, usually for decapitation, for clear-cut decapitations on the battlefield, you don't necessarily find the head. But in our cases, the heads were all nicely buried with the people. But it seems like there was some type of coup de grace, so they were like basically holding the head and cutting or slitting the throat on the battlefield, just to make sure the guys don't come back.
I think they show that very well in some movies, actually. One of the few things that they may get accurate in these historical dramas and films. And we had a few comments. BB has said she's loving the pictures and the examples, and she'd love to see a 2,500-year-old nail. Unfortunately, I have no pictures of any nails to show you. But they're quite small, generally. I don't know, what type of nails, what size are they roughly? The nails getting?
They're kind of like small square nails. They're like more an like ornamental part. Possibly these coffins have been covered in some sort of textile, and the nails were used to kind of keep the textile on the wood. So the small iron nails, the thing is, iron as opposed to bronze doesn't really preserve so well. So usually when you get like an iron object, it's this chunk of rust, and it can be very hard to actually recognize what it once was. Whereas, bronze objects can be much older, but they're much nicer preserved. And so that's a bit the issue with the corrosion of iron objects. So sometimes it can be difficult to really understand its original shape. That's where reconstruction comes in, and you need have some good conservator who can actually carve it out of the rust.
I know sometimes in the UK, if there is a budget, they will get bits of slag, so that's like some sort of iron formation, or this sort of objects, and they would X-ray them if they have the budget. Though they do sometimes do that to save the chiseling away by a conservator.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what kind of object it is, it's definitely worth doing an X-ray. The State Archaeological Service of the Canton of Bern, for example, they have their own X-ray in their facilities, and so they have it relatively cheaply, so they can really afford doing that. But in most cases, it requires some extra effort to do that.
And we had another comment or another question on Instagram, and apologies, I can't find your name, but you did ask, well, you made a comment about how we always find burials in the steppe, but do you have any evidence of seasonal settlements?
That is a very good question. Yes, so largely in the past, steppe archaeology really has been an archaeology of the dead. And it's only been in maybe the last 10, max 20 years that people have really started to seriously look into seasonal settlements, seasonal migration, and actually understanding what the living people were doing. Because if you completely base your assumptions and findings on what the dead are, then you definitely might make some mistakes or have some biases that you're not really aware of. And so in most areas of the steppe, this research is still very new and kind of in its infancy. But we're making some progress because and there are ways where you can say, for example, how suitable a rangeland, a grassland is for a winter settlement. You can say that, look, usually people would move up into the mountains to like the lusher pastures in the summer where, you know, you have snow that remains longer, you get a lot of water throughout the summer because it's melting, and then you have really nice and green grass which fattens up your sheep. And obviously people back then knew that, and they had their seasonal migration routes, whereas like the pastures lower down would dry off in the summer heat and not really leave much to the cattle that you have. That's why you're actually doing these seasonal migrations, and we basically have them since the Bronze Age. And these are ways, I mean, in some areas in Central Asia, you still have active nomads, and they pretty much seem to be traveling along similar routes at least. So there's some comparability there. And if you find seasonal settlements of nowadays nomads, very often we actually find seasonal settlements of Iron Age, Bronze Age people right next to it, which is interesting. So of course, it's a complicated topic, and climate changes locally, there can be quite the fluctuations there. But overall, we're starting to get some hints on what these sites look like and what they actually are. The problem is they're very ephemeral, right? So sometimes you find some shards, find bits of charcoal. They're not like the most amazing archaeological finds out there. They're super interesting, of course, from a research perspective, but they're not, say, flashy archaeological sites that you can display to a broader public and they immediately comprehend why this is important.
We actually have a question regarding the photo that I shared earlier, the spearhead. I'm just going to share that to a screen and then I'll ask you the question. But I will come back to climate, actually. I have a question regarding climate, but we'll come back to that. Let me share the screen. Okay, there we go. So we have a photo from Angelina, and it's regarding this amazing photo. I love these type of photos, where we've got the spearheads, and Angelina has asked, actually, if you could actually explain this photo, maybe something about these finds, and ask her question, because maybe you'll already answer it.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so what you can see here are 5 iron arrowheads, and they're also dating to roughly the time period of the 4th century AD. So they were found very closely together, and that's usually a sign that they're part of a quiver. So people were then buried with the bow and a quiver with a bunch of arrows in them. And yeah, these in particular were found, I think, next to a leg of an individual. And that's, you know, archaeology is often kind of reading the remaining traces. It's very rare that we come across perfectly preserved circumstances or contexts, and something like that tells you that apparently, you know, people were buried with weapons, and you can start to imagine. So further up, we found a type of iron object that wasn't really known what it was yet, and it was a type of hook that apparently belong to the quiver. So little by little, you're kind of reconstructing what the materials looked like, because mostly the organics are completely gone, and we only are left with, you know, whatever is a bit more durable. And so for the bows, for example, we often just find the horn or the bone plates that are on the upper ends and for the handle, and the wood is completely lost. So we have to kind of draw our conclusions from the small things that are left over.
Thank you. And she was asking, let's see. Yes, Angelina's question was regarding the arrowheads, or okay, the spearheads. She was asking whether you had excavated later tombs, which date in late Iron Age, like 7th to 5th century, because in Urartu, they have similar, they have something like the Scythian invasion at the same time. I think she's talking about the artifact itself. Maybe have you found something similar that could be linked to her research area?
Yeah, so we have like a few finds, but there's like it's like Turkic period stuff. These arrowheads are really like 3rd, 4th century AD. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, because that question, I guess, was before we actually explained what they were. So, Angelina, I'm sure she's happy. So, going back to climate, now that's interesting because not everybody would know that in Siberia, actually, people do know in Siberia, it's cold. Like it's really cold. The winter's there. It's ice, like thick ice. And something about the Scythians, or in general Tuva, it's known for the Ice Maiden Princess, and in general, you having to excavate in thick ice, because that's how these bodies are so well preserved, right? The winters are cold.
Well, I mean, yes, it's very harsh continental climate, but that means basically that you have very large day-night fluctuations of the temperature. So, you know, sometimes when we excavate in summer, it can be 35 degrees Celsius, with even 40 degrees if we go to the extreme. And then during the night, it just cools down super rapidly. And it's something that you have to get used to in the field. It's not something that you really get if you're like excavating in a Mediterranean climate where it's just nicely 20 degrees day in, year out. Then of course winters are very, very harsh, and in some areas we have permafrost, but the permafrost is very spotty, so it's not like soil is frozen all over the place year round. But if we're talking about famous finds like the Ice Maiden and other, like the Pazyryk burials, for example, they're actually relatively high up in the mountains, and they're situated mostly in what you call discontinuous permafrost. That means that only spots and patches of permafrost underneath these burials. And the reason for that is that actually through digging these burials in the past, through building them, they created sort of an inn for rainwater that would then fill up the grave chamber and freeze. And so like that, you actually have the water, and the stone mound or the burial mound over the grave chamber then preserves the permafrost underneath. And so some of these burials were actually frozen close to 2,500 years. In our area, it looks a little bit different, and we've been like going back and forth between frozen, yeah, okay, it's still there. We have really good wood preservation, but then in the periphery, it doesn't seem to be, well, we at least don't have like soft tissue of humans and other things. So we have really well preserved bones, clearly. In the main burial mound, it seems to be a little bit different. So just this campaign, we went down in a number of chambers, and we found actually really nice and clear chunks of ice, which is very well, encouraging, let's say. We really hope that we get some great organic preservation, because obviously for archaeologists, having organic preservation is one of the most lucky windfalls that you can imagine, because it tells you such a more vivid story about how people were living in the past. If you can actually look at, human remains, human skin, but also other like bio artifacts like seeds, other crops, textiles, and things like that. So it really completes the picture, as opposed when you just have, some rotting bones and some iron and bronze finds.
And it just reminds me, before I go on, if there's any questions, please write them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We do have one question from BB regarding the arrowheads and spearheads. She asked, what kind of wood was used for the bows, if you know? Do you know? Has any wood survived?
It's a good question. I think we have, we have several bows that survive. I need to look up the English terms, though. I'm not sure what these trees are called in English. I'm sorry.
It's fine. You can say it in whichever language you know. Somebody might be able to translate whilst watching.
Yeah, we have what? I mean, I can just look it up, I guess.
You could go into Google. Whilst he's searching, I'm trying to find a video that shows tuba, but I can't find anything that just shows how amazing it is, unfortunately. I'm quite sad about this, because I was hoping I could find like a beautiful aerial shot of something.
Well, I mean, I can kind of describe it to you if you want.
You could. There's nothing like seeing it, is there? I mean,
that is true. Just kind of close your eyes and imagine it, right? No, so for tuba is actually mostly a mountainous area that has is pretty rugged terrain. There's relatively high mountains, lots of taiga, plenty of trees in the upper areas. And then if you go to the south, we're going towards Mongolia, where the areas become a lot more arid. And there we really go into steppe territory, where you have these open grasslands. And the area that I'm excavating in, the so-called Valley of the Tsars, is this really nice valley that is just kind of at the edge between taiga and steppe, where really like it's this big open valley where you have wonderful pasture, and for nomadic pastoralists, for people who live off the land by actually having sheep, goat, horses, that's basically the perfect spot. And you really see it when you approach tuba on basically the one road that leads into it from the north, where you're coming through the mountainous areas, through the woodlands, and then this valley opens up and you have this golden steppe land, and you immediately comprehend why this was a spot for people to bury their dead.
Amazing. I want to go back now. I'd love to. It was such a long time ago. I think that's 6-7 years ago I was there. It'd be amazing. I'm going to quickly show some photos. Let me check. Have I missed any questions? And it was about wood. I think it'd be quite nice to show this photo of you guys working on the timber structures. So I'm just going to share the screen. Okay, so we have this. There we go. So we have, is this you here working? Wrapping
Yeah,
it.
that's me.
So it looks like, are you wrapping it up? Are you lifting it and taking it away to do study?
Yes, that's correct. We're doing dendrochronology sampling here in this picture. And the reason we're doing this is that obviously, for everybody knows, right? Every tree is essentially making a ring every year. And sort of the width of the ring allows you to, like, it's dependent on how much rainfall you have. It was like if the tree had a lot of water, it makes like a thicker ring. And if you measure these rings, you kind of get a curve. And through that curve, you can then like interlock several curves of other trees. And with that, you can go back in time. And then if you match a curve of a tree that you found with this longer curve, then you can basically say when this tree was cut down. So it's one way how archaeologists can date things. And if you have a complete dendrocurve, then basically you can say to the year when a particular tree was cut down. Now, our burial is, roughly 3,000 years old. A little less. It's dating to the 9th century BC. And in Tuva, we don't really have a complete dendrocurve yet. So this is basically one part of this curve, of this tree ring curve that is missing. And so what you can do is you can actually now date individual tree rings through radiocarbon. It's a method called wiggle matching. So basically, you date a number of individual tree rings, and that narrows down the date for this particular tree. And you can then kind of like have a sort of precision dating, which is why we were able to date our tomb to about a 30-year time span in the 9th century. So methods are getting very, very precise, and it's actually pretty neat. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and which has been a long-standing question in early Scythian archaeology in the area, is people always assume that these large burials were kind of built up in one go. And that's an important question because it has implications of our idea about the societal structure. So if you imagine you have this huge burial of 140, 150 meters in diameter, and that was built over, a 2-3 month period during the summer, then that means something completely different for the population structure during that time period than if it was built over, say, a 40-50 year time period. And through actually sampling and dating every individual tree in this architectural structure, we then kind of get a fine chronology of how this tomb was built up. And that will eventually let us answer the question whether all the trees were cut down in the same year, or maybe they took some breaks in between and kind of little by little completed this particular tomb.
Amazing, thank you for that. And I'm just going to quickly share again. And here we have, as I mentioned earlier, about permafrost. You mentioned permafrost earlier. So in this region here, it looks pretty cold and pretty icy. So this is water. There's like a pump there.
Right? Yes, it was pretty cold and pretty icy. So basically, yeah, digging in winter. I mean, and this is not even full winter yet. This is like beginning of October in Tuva. It kind of sucks digging under these circumstances. Everybody who's a field archaeologist can probably relate. And if you've ever done a winter campaign, it is not particularly fun. But if then on top of everything, you're living in a tent, it becomes sort of hard. One of the problems we have on our particular site is it's really located in a floodplain of a river, right? So we have groundwater coming up once we reach a particular layer. And this was in 2019, where we were really hoping that the water would go away during the cold winter months, because usually when we show up in spring, so roughly around end of April, when we can actually start working in the area, there's not really a lot of water there. So these are the most valuable months for us to actually do excavation. But later on, but the latest in late July, usually early July already, we get lots of rainfall, we get meltwater from the mountains, and that leads to the entire site being, at least the way to the site, being covered completely in water. So usually we can sort of wade through the swamp on our way to work. And then, of course, once we dig down, that means we have plenty of water, and most burial pits cannot really be excavated without actually using pumps. And so what we tried here was like, okay, we've never tried an excavate in late September, early October. Let's try this. Maybe the water is gone. Bless you.
Thank you.
But that wasn't really the case. So it was just basically the same kind of work, just much harder, because every morning when you come to work, the water is back to the level where it was before. And then first you kind of hack through like 10 centimeters of ice, remove all the ice, and then you still have to pump out the water and kind of work in freezing mud throughout the day, which wasn't exactly the most fun, I have to say. But it was really, you know, every excavation is a kind of learning process. And it's, well, on one hand, it's understanding the local regulations, it's understanding the local culture, it's really getting to know the people who live around the site and being on good terms with them, but it's also understanding the natural surroundings. And that was part of this learning process. So now, you know, 3 years into the project, we finally know how to excavate this tomb. But things just take time, and in fact, you know, good research just takes time.
I mean, I can kind of make out where your boards are for the wheelbarrows and things.
Right.
I can't imagine. I mean, I've worked in maybe, well, in the UK it gets cold. Well, in England you get a little bit of snow. You don't really get that much snow, so I can't imagine.
I mean, everything breaks down in London once you have like 2 centimeters of snow, isn't it?
Everything shuts down. Like, we want to be at home. We want a snow day.
Airports in particular.
Yeah. You sound like you know from experience here. Something you said earlier about traveling, it reminded me of this photo here. This is a monster.
Yeah, this is probably the most efficient way to actually get to work for us. We did a first campaign with just, you know, a tractor and walking, and within, you know, frame of what, 3-4 days, a tractor got stuck 4-5 times, and then you spend half a day digging out the tractor. It is literally a swamp on the way to the site. And with these things, we can actually get through the swamp in pretty much every condition. I mean, it's essentially a tank without the weapon on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive.
And it's certainly very, very helpful.
Yeah, and we have a question from Claire. Hi, Claire. And they've asked, how long does it take to get to site?
On foot, it's roughly a 40-45 minute walk from our camp.
Oh, no.
Which is not so bad. I mean, we set up camp in an area that is reasonably close to the river, because we're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, so we do need you know, water to wash ourselves, and water for the banya, which is a Russian sauna, which is one of the best things we really have in the camp. But we cannot really camp close to the site because it's really surrounded by swamp. So we need to take that trek every day. Yeah, at least have dry feet for sleeping and things like that.
Yeah. See, I was lucky when I worked in Tuba. It was literally like a 7-minute walk, and we could kind of see the site from where we were staying. But that was because it was during like the summer season, so we had no issues at all compared to.
Well, I mean, they're really marvelous sites that you can really nicely work on in Tuva, whereas some of the sites that my colleagues work on are literally located on like a sandy beach. And we're just, a few hours drive away from them, and we're just crawling through the swamp. It's certainly one of the tougher sites to work on, just through the conditions, but the finds and the findings especially make it absolutely worth it to work there.
I'm just about to show this little disclaimer, about to show some more human remains. I'm just going to share the screen again, because there's this picture here that really took me, actually. Before we even show the human remains, I'll show this little vessel that you sent, and it's of a small ceramic vessel from a child's burial, and it's beautiful. I'm just going to show this now. There we go. So this you found during your project, I see, because it's a Frozen Corpse Golden Treasures, the project, I see.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a ceramic vessel that we've excavated in the southern periphery. Also belongs to these burials that you've seen before. The cool thing about this is that, well, or sad thing if you want, it's from a child's burial, but we have some sort of miniaturization process going on. So you can really see that people were basically making smaller vessels for a smaller person in this case, which is, in a way, it's kind of heartwarming, right?
It is. It really is, and it's quite rare to be able to see artifacts like this. It's where you kind of, as you said, you get a kind of connection with the people of that time.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have that actually fairly frequently on site, because we have such good preservation that when say you uncover an arrowhead inside a skull, there's no way this is just leaving you sort of unemotional. It's quite intense in a way, when you do effectively uncover an ancient murder weapon, and you're the first one to really look at this crime since the person has been buried. It makes it very kind of immediate and real in a way.
Yeah, it does. Okay, for the viewers, I'm about to show a burial. There we go. So this, as we're speaking of burials, I can see some pottery fragments here. And is that an axe or something?
No, it's actually a iron vessel, which is very interesting. That I had not really seen these before starting to work on our site. So yeah, this is effectively an iron pot, which is very well preserved. Like for an iron object, 1,700 years old, is a pretty neat find, I have to say. And what we think these are actually copies of much larger cauldrons that were used for feasts where you can actually boil meat in them. And so smaller types of these vessels were given into the graves.
And is it quite common to see the arms like this?
The arm positions are not particularly typical. So most of our burials are kind of in supine position, so they're lying on their backs. But for this particular material culture, it's very heterogeneous. So we have, burials with the head to the north, to the south, to the east. Most of them are sort of oriented northwest. And for those of you who don't know, like archaeologists often distinguish material cultures based on burial rites, and one important part is how people kind of were actually directing the skeletons. And in this sort of later Iron Age period, we don't really have a very stringent, concise burial practice. We have even one case where we have a very like a hyperflex position where the person is essentially having the knees on the height of the shoulders, and it seems like it's been effectively bound or wrapped in something. Of course, the wrappings are gone, but it's a very unnatural position that you would have a hard time putting a dead body into without actually having any additional help from any kind of materials. And we're currently looking into whether this could potentially be a mummy. So we're looking at fine cuts from the bones to see whether there are some residues, if the taphonomics work out. So basically, if the decay of the bones was faster, it was slowed down by some kind of material. And like that, we can, even without having an actual mummy, which we're still hoping to get at some point, we can actually trace mummification practices.
Wow, that would be really interesting. That'd be really interesting, yeah. And just for the viewers as well, there are many different, as we say, archaeology is a science, and there's many different things that we do on site and during post-excavation. We have Gino here doing some DNA sampling. I'm going to show this photo, which is very cool to see. There we go. So what is the process here for sampling? I can see you're putting it into a fines bag, and you're probably doing a label.
So we have extremely clean small plastic bags that you actually rip open. They're completely devoid of any kind of external DNA. So they really look at that during the manufacturing process, because usually any kind of contamination that you have is difficult for the analysis afterwards. Now, in our case, we're lucky because we have relatively good DNA preservation, and so it's quite easy for the analysts to sort of trace what is ancient DNA and what is possible contamination. If you have much more fragile DNA, much more fragmented DNA, then it becomes more of an issue. So at the beginning, when we didn't know that yet, we were really protecting the samples. So we were only taking them. First of all, we're taking them right away. Once the skeleton shows up, we usually take a tooth. We take that out of the jaw, we put it into an extremely clean bag with gloves on, with a mouth guard on, with a hairnet on, and when we protect it from sunlight and temperature, because those two things are both killing DNA essentially. And then we bring it to the lab and extract the DNA. But that's something that you have to be highly specialized on. It takes about 7 to 10 years to really get to the level where you can do proper ancient DNA analysis, which is not really my focus, obviously. So I'm mostly in charge of just sampling things here. Now, once we found out that things are actually way better preserved than we originally expected, it becomes less of an issue. So then if you have gloves and you take the sample right away, it's usually enough to really get a good signature and get a good ancient DNA result.
Wow, that's so interesting. I think we've spoken enough about human burials for our viewers, and I'd like to show a lovely photo that you showed of this artifact, and then we can quickly talk about actually excavating in Tuva and working with indigenous archaeologists, local archaeologists. I think that'd be quite interesting. So here we have you with a metal heart. Where did you find this?
So this came out from a Turkic burial, probably dating to around the 6th, 7th century AD. And it's part of a belt ornament. The burial wasn't in particularly good condition. It was kind of like jumbled up bones, possibly a little bit of charcoal and ash. So maybe it's been a burned person, essentially, with the nice bronze objects on top of it, and also parts of a horse that we found in the area.
Oh, that's cool. That is very cool. So we actually had a question earlier about yurts. They were asking, you know, if we're going back to the time of your area. We actually have two questions regarding this. One is yurts. Do you have evidence of yurt structures?
We can assume that something along the lines existed. We have one particular rock art panel where we have a depiction of houses and something that looks like yurt-like structures. And then also, if you're going to the early Iron Age and we're looking at burial contexts, we have these really nice wood structures that are essentially block houses, right? And they're really being talked about in terms of houses for the dead, because they're solid wood structures. And so block houses don't really leave much archaeological traces, because what you usually would be looking for are post holes, right? So if people ran some sort of big wooden log into the soil to have like something that is stable for a housing structure, then you see that in the archaeological record. But for blockhouses, you don't, because you have essentially horizontal wood beams stacked on top of each other. But we can assume similar structures for the early Iron Age, and I personally think probably for earlier periods as well. I think that really goes into the Bronze Age. But to find ultimate proof, and essentially find a Bronze Age or Iron Age wooden house, it proves tricky, right? Because most of these things are just gone. So it's just indirect evidence that we have.
And we have another question from Curious Archaeologist asking, any religious artifacts from the Steppe site?
Well, I mean, religious is a tricky word. Archaeologists tend to prefer the term ritualistic, maybe, because it's much broader. We don't really know what kind of religious beliefs people in the early Iron Age on that particular site had. Often it's assumed that it was some way, shape, or form of shamanism or animism more broadly that, you know, thinks about having essentially a nature that is infused with spirits and divinity. That is derived as an idea from Scythian animal style, where animals play a huge part, seem to play a huge part in their mythology. And also seem to be used as some sort of protection mechanism against evil forces and things like that. So if you want, like, the entire site is a ritualistic artifact in that sense. But we're still, you know, we hope that we'll come to a good end with this project within the next 2 or 3 years. Obviously, yeah, delayed by COVID for at least another year. But we're still, we've mostly started digging in the periphery, because the periphery is very important in understanding sort of the longue durée, sort of the long-term history of a particular site. But we're only just getting into the weeds with the early Iron Age, and we don't have too many objects or items from the site from the early Iron Age at the moment. They are no doubt going to show up in masses very soon as we enter the main structure.
And for our viewers and listeners on the podcast, if you have any questions, get them in now, because we're about to finish. We have hit the 1 hour mark. So whilst you get your last questions in, I'm going to quickly share. So Gino, you took part, and I actually love this photo. Trevor's amazing. This is such a great photo here of you being a part of this shamanic ritual. How was it for you?
Well, personally, I think it's very, very important to work very closely with people who own the land, who essentially are stewards of this cultural heritage. And in Tuva, you have Tuvinians who have been on this land for probably thousands of years. And so it's, for me, they have this very interesting mix of different religions. So there's like some sort of Tibetan Buddhism mixed with actually shamanism, animism, that is still kind of persistent in the area. And so working closely with the community and actually having Tuvinian archaeologists on site is super important, on top of actually working, of course, with the Russian archaeologists. So yes, taking part in shamanic rituals is part of what we need to essentially ask for permission to open up these burials. And I think at this point, most local people are actually fairly happy that we did these things. And we're also taking care that, once in a while we can take on younger Tuvinians, so they get in direct touch with research into what is effectively their cultural heritage. So
I think
this is extremely important, and it's something that has been somewhat neglected, I say, by the discipline of archaeology in the past, because we've been pretty much a colonial subject, and we, for a long time went into countries that we didn't belong to and just took nice stuff back to our home places, which isn't exactly the point. So also, all the artifacts that we are digging up obviously remain in Tuva. They go to a local museum, the Tuvinian National Museum in Kizil, and are exhibited there. So people can actually, engage with the cultural heritage, learn about their history, and that's something that I think all of us agree that is a very important part of why we're even doing this project.
It's so true. I never thought about that when I was there before. Actually, they're fortunate that that this wasn't discovered, 200 years ago. I'm so happy that this artifacts were found now in this century, because if it was found 200 years ago, where would the artifacts be?
Well, I mean, most likely in St. Petersburg or
probably.
Moscow. Who knows?
Yeah, probably. But yeah, their museum is great, actually. I remember the collection, seeing it. It's the first time I've gone into a room and had to have like a security check. And then you go inside this room and you're locked in so that you can see all the gold artifacts.
Yeah, it's an amazing place, for sure. And they have so much more. They're just, you're just scraping the surface of it when you go to the museum. There's so much more in the archives.
Definitely.
So definitely a cool place to go.
Yeah, we had a question slightly off topic, more to do with your social media and public engagement. I guess that's kind of become like a part-time job in this sense, because you're posting every day, right? Just like myself, every day we're posting, and then we have to comment on back and everything like that. So it's complete public engagement to the next level. How are you finding it?
Well, I mean, honestly, I kind of started this because a friend forced me to just, start communicating a little bit. But relatively early on, I was actually surprised that it wasn't like there's this real public interest in archaeology, and people are usually there's like, oh, you're an archaeologist, and they're full of questions. But then academic archaeology is very often a bit withdrawn from the public sphere, and they engage in their very niche
Gonna try and
research topics. Are we still online?
Yeah, we're still online.
Okay, well, I'm still going. Okay,
I just can't see you with my webcam. I'm about to share your page as you were talking.
Fair enough. Yeah, so people are really like working in these niche areas, and they have a hard time. And obviously, like, researchers are super busy, and they usually don't have time for massive outreach and communication. I mean, it's, as you said, it's basically becoming a job on its own. But nonetheless, I think it's very important to do that because, well, a lot of us, not me at this point, but a lot of us are financed by taxpayers' money as well to kind of actually take care of cultural heritage that belongs to everyone. And so in order to really make it everyone's cultural heritage, you kind of have to push it out there a little bit. And, when you put yourself out there, you face a lot of criticism, of course. There's, it's always easy to kind of criticize people from a kind of anonymous point of view. But I think overall, the response has been fairly positive. And I've been surprised how many nice replies I've gotten from people, how much interest there really is in archaeology. And the thing is, at a time where archaeological institutes all over the place are facing budget cuts, and they have issues even just buying their books to conduct their research, you have to tell people why archaeology matters. And for my project, I've actually never been prompted to do that, because once people read about what we are doing, it is absolutely clear for them that it matters. And so I think there's a lot of good that comes from really just communicating to a broader public, albeit in a slightly, simplistic form. I mean, Instagram is not the place for intricate, detailed academic discussions. Very often we're leaving out details just to make it a bit more comprehensible. You can bring humor into it, which you really can't in like an academic publication. But it all makes it more engaging, and I think that's what heritage should be about. It's about interacting with the past and learning from the past, and not kind of enclosing it in academic articles that in the end nobody really reads outside of a very small circle of experts. Of course, these academic articles are important. They're part of the discussion, part of what gets us ahead as a discipline and what actually produces the knowledge. But then there's the next step that needs to push this knowledge out there. And, a lot of archaeologists are always complaining that, people are, so unnuanced and they don't really understand. Well, then you have to make them understand. And you have to educate people, and you have to provide things that are really accessible to someone who is not really into reading highly technical articles on Google Scholar.
It's so true. This is what the last point, especially accessibility. These journals, the way that they're written, it's not written for everyone. It's written for specialists or someone in a niche. you know, even if I was to read some articles I've read, and I've had to then search what these terminologies are, because even in my, you know, domain as a field archaeologist, I don't come across these terms. So it's definitely something that I think the next generation of archaeologists are working towards 100%.
I think so. They're definitely roots of a good movement here.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're pushing for it now. And it's changing slowly. A lot more institutions now are on social media and trying to make these short little videos and things like that. But baby steps for them. And I think we're just now full ahead, like just trying to like literally break down the wall.
That's good. You have to set an example, and then once you get imitated, that's a form of flattery, I think.
Yes, it is. I'll go with that one. And we actually had a question from Alex, which is quite a nice place to end, I would think. And it's actually about your hobby of martial arts. And I'm going to show the video. Dun, dun. You've actually, oh, I can't see the reel now that you made. Now that Instagram has reels.
All right.
We'll do this
take that one, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do this one. Oh, there's music. There you go.
Damn, it's loud.
I can't turn the music down. Look at this. What type of martial arts is this? Is it martial arts?
Well, it's called tricking. It's basically a mixture of all different kinds of martial arts. Everything that looks flashy. It's not exactly, you know, something to defend yourself, but it's sort of for the beauty of movement and the joy in just, you know, exercising complex movements. And I've done martial arts for like a very long time, and it's something that, you know, especially when you're spending hours upon hours in front of the screen writing academic articles, you need some sort of balance. And in a year like 2020, right, where you don't have the field work that you usually need, this is a great way to, you know, get the energy out. And I'm very much not just a mental being, so I need the physicality there.
Well,
and so
for your trolls out there, for any trolls trolling Gino,
yeah, go ahead, give it to me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do you have any questions for me, or anything that you'd like to say before we go to the viewers?
Well, I know where to find you, right? So anytime.
Anything for the viewers, maybe about the project Frozen Corpse, if you're allowed to speak about it?
Right. So for the last 5 years, we've actually been producing a documentary series, and we're currently done with the first season, and we're in negotiations. Can't really say with whom, but very soon you'll probably have something to watch that will probably go a little bit beyond the average archaeological TV documentary series that just arrives on site when the big finds are made, but really gives you a bit more background, a bit more you know, details into what archaeologists actually do beyond jumping around and kicking stuff.
Am I allowed to show the trailer, the one that's on Vimeo?
You can go ahead and do that. Do we still have it up there? I don't. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I've actually left it in the description box below for anyone that would like to watch this later. But I think it'd be a great place to end this interview. Let's see into the world of Gino. So I'm going to attempt to share this. I've never done Vimeo before, so I'm not sure how it's going to go. Yeah, let's try. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, let's see. Because sometimes it doesn't let me share things. So let's see if it works. Let's see. Really, I should have shown this first, but it's a little treat for anybody who's still live with us. You get to see something.
I think we still have some people with us, do we?
We do. We do. Okay. And here we go. Dun, dun, dun.
last summer we did an expedition to Tuva Republic, to southern Siberia, and we found the oldest, biggest royal Scythian tomb out there. And what is even more exciting is there's permafrost in the area. There's really only a handful of permafrost tombs and very few that are not robbed, where there have been preserved ice mummies and the whole inventory of the tomb is still intact. We took some wood samples of luckily preserved wood that we could date by means of C14. We now have to act fast because with the rising temperatures, the permafrost could melt and destroy all the organics preserved in that tomb. And these are things that are over 3,000 years old that look like new, like they've basically been put into the freezer yesterday. Finding the oldest Scythian royal tomb provides us with a sort of origin for the Scythian culture and lets us understand how this very particular culture that spread through all of Eurasia at one point came into being. It lets us understand how the environmental factors and the social factors came together and formed this very distinctive piece of the human story. The tomb is 150 meters in diameter. That means there is tons and tons of rocks that we need to move under which the actual treasures lie. The clock is ticking. The things are melting. Now that we've discovered the tomb, it's at risk of being looted. And the longer we wait, the more likely it is that we lose these exceptional objects to looters who are in the area. For the purpose of supporting this 4-year archaeological project in Siberia, I've created the Foundation for Archaeological Exploration to preserve cultural heritage in remote locations around the globe.
And I think, thank you so much for joining us today, Gino. And I hope that video gets everybody excited for the potential release of the documentary.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. For our viewers at home, see you next week.
Bye.
Let's go. And bye.